Our next speaker is Lesley Blackner.
I want to say thank you for having me today. It's really a privilege. I guess I need to speak. I need to move this closer. That's kind of a hard act to follow. And it reminded me of something that Phil and I were talking about the other night. And one of the reasons immigration is really hard for people on the left is because we all want to be nice. That's the thing that characterizes the left for me, is that we care about everybody. And we want to be nice and we want to be fair. And if you say no to some people, you're often viewed as not being nice. So it's a big psychological problem for a lot of my friends down in Florida. That's where I'm from. On the left, I'm active in the Sierra Club down there. And the thing that I notice about my friends on the left is they all want to be nice, they want to be fair, they want to be inclusive, they want to follow Martin Luther King's creed. And so there is kind of a conundrum for some of them. And that's different from people on the hard right, because they're not afraid of not being nice. But anyway, I'm here today. I'm from Florida. I'm an attorney who got interested in the population question pretty much on my own, growing up in Florida, where population growth is our economic model, right? Build it and they will come. And they have come. Florida's got about 19 million people. When the growth rate starts slipping, the newspapers panic, the political establishment panics, because construction and land use speculation is the entire socioeconomic political structure of the Sunshine State. And they don't really have an alternative model, and that's one reason why they're in such bad shape right now. At any rate, I came to get interested in population about 15 years ago on my own, just having grown up in Florida and watched the state fill up. I made some discoveries which some of really the heroes of our movement are here today. They already knew this stuff. But one of the things that I came to realize is that we all know that in the late 60s, population growth was really a very big social concern. And there was a consensus on the issue in the United States that endless population growth doesn't serve the national interest. This consensus was codified in the nation's premier environmental law, the National Environmental Policy Act. And I hope that y'all all received the handout that you should get it. NEPA should connect the dots. If you don't have it, be sure you get one. And there's actually another one, too. This NPG memo, which was written in 1991. Hopefully y'all get it. At any rate, the National Environmental Policy Act is really the premier law, federal law in the United States. Basically, what it requires is that every federal agency has to begin to take environmental concerns into account in their federal decision-making process, right? And basically, what that means is that previously, the federal agencies didn't have to worry about the environment. They could throw up a dam or build a road or build a nuclear reactor without worrying about what any of the consequences to the environment would be. And NEPA changed all that in 1969. And under NEPA, every federal agency, and that's everything from the Department of Agriculture to the CIA to the Department of Defense to the Department of Education, every agency is supposed to undertake what's called an environmental impact statement whenever there is a major federal action significantly affecting the human environment. This is my NEPA book. You can see how much jurisprudence has developed and evolved around NEPA. I've done a number of cases under NEPA. NEPA doesn't say that federal agencies have to make the best decision for the environment. It just says that they have to consider environmental impacts when they go through their decision-making process. Specifically, the EIS, and they only have to do the EIS for major federal actions. The way the agencies get around that most of the time is they say, well, this is not a major federal action. It's a minor action. But at any rate, the EIS says they have to look at the environmental impacts. They have to look at unavoidable effects. They have to look at alternatives. And they have to look at long-range consequences. I suppose that's part of effects. And they have to look at irreversible and irretrievable commitments of resources. Well, these are all a bunch of really kind of ambiguous words. You put a bunch of lawyers into a room and major federal action significantly affecting the quality of the human environment, you're going to get however many lawyers are in the room. Those words mean different things to different people, depending on your worldview, depending on your politics, depending on who's got the money, what you want, who wants what. So in 1977, the Carter administration issued an executive order mandating the Council on Environmental Quality, which is an office within the White House, to define these terms, right? What is significant? What are effects? What is the human environment? Yada, yada, yada. And the CEQ was charged with promulgating these guidelines, regulatory guidelines. And then the various agencies, the myriad agencies of the United States, would then use those guidelines in crafting their own in-house NEPA regulations, which will guide their specific decision-making. So, for example, I'm most familiar with the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers down in Florida, and the Army Corps has its own NEPA regulations, which track what the CEQ promulgated back in 1977. The courts have held that the CEQ regulations are entitled to great deference. That's very important to keep in mind. They can't just blow off what CEQ has said. When we look at NEPA, and this is reflected in the handout, you'll see that population growth was a big issue, a big component of the NEPA push. And I've quoted all the various parts, or some of the various parts, in the policy statement of the statute that talk about how, for example, the goal of the United States is to achieve a balance between population and resource use, which will permit high standards of living and a wide sharing of life's amenities. That sounds like sustainability, doesn't it? It sounds like nirvana. And in fact, I've read numerous cases, not really cases, treaties, documents. This book talks about what good feel-good 60s language that is. It's really feel-good. But you know what? It shouldn't just be feel-good. It's a statutory mandate. That is the reason for the law, right? That is the underpinning of NEPA. At any rate, to make a long story short, in 77, the CEQ promulgated these NEPA regulations, these guidelines. And prior, from say 69 through 70, and by the way, it was the Nixon administration that implemented it. Nixon signed off on NEPA. We should remember that, believe it or not. And then population was a significant policy issue in the CEQ's memoranda that they published every year an annual report was published every year through 77 on the state of the U.S. environment. Population was a big component of that. But after 77, the population question just dropped off the map. And in 77, these various guidelines were promulgated. And what happened? Well, population growth was codified as an indirect effect under NEPA by the CEQ. Under NEPA, a federal agency only has to undertake an EIS if there are direct effects, right? Those are major impacts, significant impacts to the human environment. So if if a policy issue only has indirect effects, you don't have an EIS. And furthermore, indirect effects are often viewed as speculative, hard to determine. They get pushed into the closet. So really, population growth was relegated to the closet in our jurisprudence in 1977. And this is reflected in all of the subsequent NEPA regs that the various agencies promulgated. For example, the INS, Immigration Naturalization Service, which was abolished after 9/11 and replaced with Homeland Security, had no NEPA regulations regarding any of its immigration policy making, even though immigration is a big federal action, a significant federal action, and we all know that it significantly affects the human environment. But there were no NEPA regulations to guide INS in its decision-making process, except for the citing of INS detention facilities, because those are direct physical effects. Most cases or issues dealing with direct effects, roads, dam construction, federal construction, offshore leases, but it's almost as if the people aren't effects, which is really crazy and shows the sort of schizophrenic thinking that pervades our culture, certainly our jurisprudence. And you see this confusion in the courts wherein they rule that population growth is a, quote, socioeconomic impact. And by the way, human environment, it doesn't just mean moving the earth around, digging a hole, paving over the land. It does mean economic impacts, tax consequences, consumption patterns, those sorts of things. But again, those are only viewed as indirect effects, and they never really get the prominence that they otherwise would because of this 1977 ruling, which I think was erroneous. Challenges are brought every day to erroneous regulations that are, quote, arbitrary and capricious and not in accord with law. The Administrative Policy Act or Procedures Act, the APA, provides for that. Maybe it's time to take on this regulation because this error that happened 35 years ago or so has totally permeated federal decision making from top to bottom, and it's not the only reason we're in this situation today, but certainly it's part of it. And it's also part of why the debate about population has been so dishonest among our political elites and the top echelon of our society, for example, the media. Thank you.